feet on a screen is going to be a little easier on the eye. So little subtle differences can help. So when you're putting your slides together, you might want to consider using sans serif without the little feet. So Times New Roman, that has little feet. That's maybe a little better for paper. But for a screen, sans serif, maybe Arial. There's other ones too, Helvetica, all kinds. So sans serif. And then also how big those fonts are. So it's good to know in that forum how big of a room you'll be presenting in. And the furthest person away, where they're going to be sitting. Because you want them to be able to see it. The front person's probably going to be able to see it no matter what. But the back of the room, are they going to be able to see it? Maybe even test it and make sure that they can see it. Because you know what? It turns out decision makers often are in the back of the room. Dr. Stewart is part of how this whole program's funded, right? And she is so busy. We're all busy, of course. But she's so busy and she's got lots of meetings. Maybe she comes to the presentation 5 minutes late because she's running from another meeting. And then there's, where's the seats left at that point? In the back of the room. So you have your important decision makers sometimes in the back of the room. Not that everybody isn't important, but you got to think about, okay, it's really critical that my information gets across to everybody and that everybody can see. So we want to design for that person in the back of the room. And generally, on a screen, you're not going to want to go really, they used to say 18 point, but not below 24. But again, it depends on the size of your screen and the size of the room. So you can work with your mentors and maybe Professor Rincon on which room you'll be presenting in and how big those fonts need to be. Now, this doesn't have feet, so you might be tempted to use Comic Sans. And people seem to like it because it's fun, and we like to have fun. But from a design professional perspective, don't ever use that. So just stay away from it. It's like in the design community, they make fun of people who use it, right? We don't want them to be thinking about silly font. We want the design to go, like, blend into the background, and all they're doing is thinking about what we're saying, right? Because that's where the really innovative information's at. You guys are doing new and fun things. So we don't want them thinking about, oh, look at all that bouncy stuff, or look at that typo. We want them thinking, wow, I could try that in my class, right? All right, and just something briefly on colors. Now, some people are colorblind, a small percentage of the population, but most of us can see some colors. But just because we can use lots of different colors doesn't mean we should, and we need to think about how colors look together. For example, we can use them for contrast, right? This is easy to read, black and white, or even white on black. Would you say that's pretty easy? If there's not enough contrast, then it's harder to read. It might look kind of cool, but not so easy to read. So if we had this in the big room and someone's sitting in the back, they're just listening. This is not helping them at all. Or, even worse, it could jump out at you and kind of hurt your eyes a little bit. So that's not easy to read, right? That's kind of a little bit jarring, you might say. And this isn't a good contrast either. It's pretty, but it's not easy to read. We want to make it super easy to see. So even though these might be prettier, we want to go for functionality first, right? Now, Albert Einstein, everybody, I think, understands he was a brilliant man. One of the things he said that we should work to make everything as very simple as it can be, but not simpler, right? So the simplest we can make our information so we can get across, then the more likely people will understand it. But if we make it too simple, then if it's missing something, we don't want that to happen either. So we're always going for simple. It's not like, oh, I want to make this complicated so I sound smart, right? No, make it seem easy and simple. If I, as a teacher, can make it seem like my class was easy, yet everybody learned a lot, that is the best thing ever, right? So you want to make it seem as easy as possible for the people in the audience to understand. It's not about sounding smart and using big words and nobody knows what you're talking about. So simple as possible, but not simpler. So I've been talking a lot. Take a little break. Any questions? No? Ready for some PowerPoint tips? Okay, when it comes to putting that together? Okay. First thing to remember is that PowerPoint is a visual aid, right? It's giving us a chance to use visual information to work with our brain. It's not a textual aid, so it's not like we're giving a paper right? We're not sitting there and reading the paper. We're using visuals to help get our information across. So it's a visual aid, not a textual aid. We're giving a presentation. We're not giving a document. So there's a couple of rules about how visuals work that can help us in presenting and as teachers too, right? One is that people will remember better if we use visuals to support what we say. Like if we were talking today and I'm just giving you this information verbally and there's nothing on the screen, you would not be remembering as much. This is saying actually you would probably remember about a sixth as much. And that thing about using time effectively, right? We want to use our limited time here as effectively as possible and not have to go back and study it more and more later, but get it the first time if we can. So if I say this and ask you 10 minutes later what this said, you might be able to remember it. But if I show you a picture with it, then maybe you're more likely to process what that means and remember it later. So we can see, oh, if it's just words, it's pretty low retention of remembering. If it's just the picture, then it's a lot better. But when you use them together, that's the best. So using pictures and words that go together is going to give us the best result. Now, this has that same information on the slide, minus the numbers, right? But we could put 50% on there, and we could put 100% on there. But the visual of it helps us. So when you're designing your slides, think about, okay, these are words. Is there any way to represent that visually to make it simple? Recognition doubles when pictures are used instead of text. So we've got some text. Or we could look at it this way. Recognition doubles. And we've got a graph, and boom, all of a sudden, wow, that jumps out at you. Now, if we think back to a minute ago, I was talking about colors and contrast. And this is okay, but really, if you look at this color, I think that contrast could be a little better than this. You know, maybe a little bit of a darker color might have been better there. But we can see it okay in here. In a big room, a little more light, it might be tricky. Okay. The same idea about visuals works with graphs. Sometimes graphs can just get, wow, complex information across very simply, but even with graphs, there's a way we can make them that makes it simple or more complicated. So here's a graph that has what some would call visual clutter, right? So we can see that, okay, oral's 10%, visual 35%, oral and visual 65%. But we've got a whole lot of things going on. We've got this series. I'm not sure what that even means. Nobody labeled that. We've got numbers here repeated there. Not that repetition, you know, that can help us learn things, but we don't need it repeated on the slide. We've got this series again. We've got all these percentages, and we've got percent. So is this as simple as it can be, but not simpler? No. So let's apply Albert Einstein's theory. And poof, wow, easier on the eye, and now I'm just focusing not on visual clutter, but on exactly what the slide's talking about. So when you put slides together, or graphs together, you might want to think about taking those guidelines out, if you can. Take that series out if you don't need it. You don't need to have every single percentage on the left-hand side, just enough to orient the user. Simple things like that can make it much easier to understand. Now, when you're putting the PowerPoint together, it's good to have a strategy or a way to organize your information. You probably do this already for your classes, right? You don't have all your files together for all your classes in one big spot. You probably have a folder for, you know, one class and another folder for another class. It's the same idea here. You have a folder for everything that's going to be used as part of your PowerPoint slide. So you're going to have your PowerPoint file, and then if there's any visuals, you could store it all there in the same place. And that way, if you're going from computer to computer, it's easy to do that, right? You've got it all together. Has anybody here ever lost their work because, oh, the power went out, or they lost their jump drive, or accidentally flushed it down the toilet, or something? Yeah, we all have. So that's a hard lesson, but we learn the lesson good that way, right? So we want to make sure, if and when that happens, because it's inevitable, it will happen again someday, you have got a backup system, and you can just say, oh, that's okay, and I'm going to keep going. Like today, if we didn't have these visuals, you wouldn't be retaining as much. So this was important to me that I have this up and going. But if I got it downloaded from the cloud where I save things with Google Docs. But if for some reason there wasn't an internet connection or it wasn't working, I've got a little jump drive. It's here. I could have loaded it on the computer. Or maybe, oh, the computer stopped working and it's broke. I've got my laptop in there and I could have hooked it up and we could still be watching it. So having backups can save the day, and the more important the situation, the more backups you should have. When I applied for my job here, I had 4 backups, and I had to go to the 3rd level of backup for a presentation I had to make to a class of students, and I was totally ready for the first one. You know, my first thing, it didn't work. Okay, I have a backup. I went to my second thing, it didn't work. I'm like, oh my goodness. The 3rd thing, it worked. So it got me started just a little bit late, but it still went on because I had backups. So that when you're going to job interviews or when you go to the SARA presentation or when you're doing the presentation to a big group of people, you want to have your backups especially. Here's the way I used to think about it. My father used to be in the military and he did a lot of logistics for them. And he taught me about belt and suspenders. If you've got a pair of pants, you don't want them to fall down, we wear a belt, right? Great. Well, if that belt breaks, my pants are falling down and I'm embarrassed, right? So I want to have suspenders too. So we always have one system and then a backup. It's our belt and suspenders. So in my classes when we talk about this, we always talk about, okay, what's our belt and suspenders today? We're saving this work. Where's the second place it's going to be? If something crazy happens, we don't want to spend 4 hours retyping that paper or whatever. We just want to go to our second system and make it all good again. Belt and suspenders. Or if you want to go shortcut, kind of like we did the shortcut for the design principles crap, belt and suspenders, BS, yeah? So, belt and suspenders. All right, questions about that? Do you guys have backup systems? I'm wondering do you guys use the cloud at all? What do you use? USB drive. So, is everything on the USB drive then? Do you have, no.
I mean, most of it's just saved on my laptop documents.
Oh, so you have a laptop and the USB drive. Good. And so those are 2 different places, right? If there was, gosh forbid, a fire and your laptop burned up, maybe USB drive's in your pocket or somewhere else, right? So it's not even in the same place. How about you guys? Email. Isn't that great? We can email it to each other? Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Or to ourselves. You had a backup too. So you're already doing these things. Yeah, that's great. I find that sometimes I set up really good systems, but then when it requires action for me, sometimes I can get lazy or forget. So I have to remind myself to stay current with it. On my laptop, I've started using Google Drive. If you sync it with a computer that you use and no one else uses to Google Drive, it can do it in the background for you. So I've got my Google Drive folder and all my folders are in there. So as long as I'm saving something to where that is, then it automatically gets backed up. So that's kind of nice. Or Dropbox is a platform online that can let you do some of that same stuff. They both have pros and cons, and they both have a certain amount of file storage you can use for free. So that's kind of nice too. I think Dr. Rincon likes Dropbox. She uses that a lot, but she uses Google Drive some too. Okay, so now we'll talk about graphics. Just a couple basics with graphics. There's 2 basic file formats. One is raster and the other is vector. And you might be familiar with this already. Raster is basically a bunch of pixels that are on the screen that make up what we see. And then vector is lines and dots. It's mathematical formulas that make up what we see. So